everybody. Welcome to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Bill Zanowitz.
I'm Steve Morey.
And I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
And we are your hairy, heavy homos that talk about comic books, but you don't have to be a hairy, heavy homo to listen in, or in this case, stream in. And naturally, it's June 2nd or 3rd. Where are we at? June 3rd? It's Pride Month anyway. Happy Pride, everybody. Happy Pride.
Huzzah!
Okay. If we were doing stuff outdoors, you would be hearing Born This Way probably about 50,000 times this month. and of course, I can't turn it off now. Okay.
So is Born This Way your kind of go-to Pride anthem now?
After experiencing it at New York Pride, and just literally was like, if not every float, every other float.
Right.
The first year that came out, it's the song I most associate with. Let me get this stuff off. It's distracting. But I would say that probably is at this point.
I think mine is and always has been, and it probably always will be, like Heather Small's Proud.
Mm-hmm.
I just love that, and I don't know if it's from like the first season of Queer as Folk or what. I just love, like, that's always my like go-to Pride dance anthem.
Yeah, that was interesting when you posted that the other day. For some reason, there were other M people and Heather Small posts that day. It was like, all of a sudden it was like it's all over, and then I posted the really cool cover that M people did of the Small Faces Itchy Park. Song you never think would work as a dance song, and it totally does. And and that's something that could also be a Pride album with that chorus of "It's All Too Beautiful." I think that could be too. Steve, what's your Pride anthem?
I mean, I'm coming out is constantly on the loop, played on a loop during the month of June, and pretty much any other time that I want to be extra gay.
Though I do have to say, if Caleb and I had our druthers, it might be Judas Priest United.
Or Jawbreaker. I was just thinking Jawbreaker. that song is a low-key gay anthem for reasons I'm not going to say on a broadcast.
Yeah. Well, we probably should talk about the show tonight.
I apologize. I'm glitching a little bit on this side.
Yeah, you're behind the times there. Anything you can do about it there, son?
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
All right. Just keep your fingers crossed. So for this particular episode, we're going to be talking about original graphic novels. I believe all of them that we're talking about does have an LGBTQIA element to them, correct? Yeah. Whether it's content or the creative team or both. And the book that we all want to talk about first, though, is a book that absolutely blew us away. I don't know what the trajectory was of who was influenced first. Was it Steve to Caleb and then the two of you to me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I think so.
All right. So let's just lift our hands up with the book in hand, which is I Never Promised You a Rose Garden by Mannie Murphy. Mannie Murphy. And this is published by Fantagraphics, and we have a lot to say about it. So let's go over to the originator. I think, Steve, tell us about this truly stunning book.
So I just kind of picked it up on a whim. I saw the content listed it was on DCBS, and I always check Fantagraphics for something wacky, something different, something that I wasn't really expecting. And this came up, and I just grabbed it, gravitated towards it because it seemed like a really interesting premise. And essentially what Mannie Murphy does in this book is that they weave together their sort of like teenage crush on River Phoenix and the tragic circumstances of his death. They're growing up in the city of Portland, where one of River Phoenix's biggest movies that he did with Gus Van Sant. My Own Private Idaho is, takes place and is set for part of the movie at least, and then brings it all together with the history of Portland, the history of racism and white supremacy in the Pacific Northwest, the tragic history of not just race relations, but also of indigenous relations in what became Oregon and the Oregon territories, and also just the really stunning, experiences that somebody growing up in that type of environment and knowing the people that are actually a big part of Gus Van Sant's early works and My Own Private Idaho and other aspects that all kind of coalesce around what we're seeing today and what we've been seeing over the past 5 years in terms of the rise and not even really the rise, just the sheer audacity and in your face forward unashamed white supremacy and racism that we've been seeing in our country, police brutality, everything is thrown into this book. And what's really interesting is that they really wrote it. The way that they wrote it was sort of in a stream of consciousness. Mm-hmm. They originally published as a series of zines, and in each part, reading an interview with them, they found the images first, and they painted the images first on the paper, and then wrote what they wanted to write about this. And again, what they're writing, it almost feels like a diary. It feels like a first person reportage of life and feelings, and very personal and very and sometimes very clinical and sometimes historical, and there's just so much here in this book, and it's very unique the way that it's written. It's very unique the way it's presented. There's a comment that Mannie Murphy made in that same interview where they talked about why they wrote it in cursive. And because everything is handwritten in this book, they wrote it in cursive specifically so it would really only be read by a certain aged audience that could appreciate not just the era that's being written about here, the people that are being talked about here, but then also be able to read it because they don't teach cursive or cursive in schools so much anymore in many parts of the country, and so younger people wouldn't necessarily pick this up and be able to just read it easily, which blows my mind a little bit, but at the same time I kind of get it. It's an interesting way of directing the story to a particular subset of readers, but
if I can just interject,
sure.
Something that you had said, I think it's important to note that Mannie Murphy identified us as non-gender specific. Yes. So when we are talking about they, them, it's not that there's a creative team. It's just that that's their preferred pronoun. So just wanted to get that in there in case there was confusion, because it is a new creator. And
correct.
I just felt it was important to say that.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. Mannie Murphy is out here representing, the genderqueer, of the LGBTQ population, and honestly, it's just it's such a moving and powerful book. There are parts of this book where the way that it's presented and the way that it's written, if you're just skimming through it, if you're just reading through it, you're not going to really feel the impact and how personal of a story this is. But also seeing the personal history mixed in with the greater history of the Pacific Northwest, as well as our country, it's just a type of poignant but bombastic poignancy. I don't know, it's an odd way of putting it. I don't know, I just on the second and third reading of this book, I feel just as much impact as the first time I read it, and it really inspired me to go back and do some research of my own and rewatch My Own Private Idaho that I haven't seen in over 20 years, and look at Gus Van Sant and River Phoenix's interviews with the boys and the men that are the inspiration for the characters in My Own Private Idaho, and that Gus Van Sant really was obsessed with, and Mannie Murphy knew and went to school with, the kind of kids, the kind of boys that are written about. It gives me a very different image of Portland than the one that kind of that I think most people are familiar with as weird and wacky Portland. A bunch of hipsters and
and specifically liberal enclave.
Yes, a very liberal, very progressive. Which historically is not Portland at all. Progressive is interesting because talk about progressiveness. 1915, you have a whole bunch of progressive white people who are like, hey, you know what would be cool? The KKK. Because we don't like private school, but we also don't like anybody of color. And so we want, forward policies, but getting rid of anybody who's not white, which is really bizarre to me. But
well, it's interesting. Yeah. That concept in and of itself is interesting because while those things are true, and I think a lot of people, especially down here in Arkansas, we think of the West Coast, but especially the Northwest, the PNW, as being this, like you said, a liberal enclave. It's also I looked it up, and over the past couple of years, Portland specifically is voted one of the whitest cities in America for several years running, and it's very easy to position yourself as a liberal enclave when you're a hegemonious society. It's very easy to pretend like racism doesn't exist when you're surrounded by white people, right? And I'm saying that as a white man. Like, and I have no idea what it's like to be in the position of people who are constantly bashed and battered with racism in the way that it has. But this book sets up, like you said, the history of how it became that way. And how it pushed out all the indigenous people, and how it ran off all of the people who flocked there to escape not only the Civil War, but also to escape the economic hardship of Reconstruction in the South, and how they shifted west. And the book tackles that, I think, in a really interesting way. And so when Steve sent this to me, because I was kind of the next in line to get the book, Steve shipped it over to me, and I really didn't know what to expect from the book. He didn't, purposefully, I think, and appreciatively, I think, didn't give me a lot to build on. He just says, look, this book does a lot of work, and I think you'll appreciate it. So check it out. And when he says it's like a stream of consciousness, that's to me is exactly what I tapped into. I like comics. I like graphic novels that break the mold, so to speak. And this book does not, it is not sequential in the way that I think that we traditionally think of sequential. This is not the type of visual storytelling that even Eisner worked in. This is so inherently on its own, and the story is crafted around it, that it demands your attention. Like, it demands that you be present in the book, which again, like, not a lot of stories, especially not a lot of like newcomers, can pull that off. What I think was especially, and I don't think I necessarily really appreciated this until Steve made the comment that he did about why it's written in cursive for being an older audience. What I was struck with, and what I noticed kind of right off the bat, but I really didn't let it sink in until the second or third reread, like you said, is that the page that it's written on, the type of paper that it's written on, is the type of 3-line paper that you use in preschool, or you use in like your kindergarten classes. It has that dotted middle line that helps you understand lowercase and uppercase. So it's written in a cursive language meant for older people, for an older audience, but it's drawn and it's written on paper that's meant for elementary students. Because I really do think what this book is doing, it's breaking down not only the Pacific Northwest, not only this regional understanding, not only the historical understanding, but the class-based understanding and the race-based understanding and the queer understanding, all of these different lenses. It's breaking it down to an elementary standard that you can really understand, even if you don't have a background in literature or in kind of this classic understanding of literary criticism. The book speaks to you on kind of a high register and a low register, which is, it's not easy to do. There's not a lot of artists or writers who can communicate that way. which again was just like, just. And I'm a sucker for gray wash anyway, so like it just made me really happy, which is awkward to say for a book like this to make you happy, because it shouldn't. It's dealing with a lot of heavy stuff.
Yeah, but
there's a lot to just digest on each and every page, whether you're experienced with it or not. Because I know who River Phoenix is. But I was a younger person when the whole River Phoenix thing existed. I know more about some of the people they talk about in this book when it comes to, the band like Hollywood Vampires, and the kind of world that they live in. I had no idea how much of a role that they played into River Phoenix, and to take
Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Exactly. To take that and to use that as a vehicle to discuss the socio-racial and political economics of a regional demographic is really cool. Like, it's really, really cool craft work.
There's there's one really interesting thing about this, and Bill, jump in for sure. That even though Mannie spends a lot of time talking about the racial divide and the toxic presence of white nationalism and what that's been doing and how that's permeated throughout the society, there's a lot spent about the queer street subculture that also exists, and that has existed since Portland's existed. So even with this sort of idea of a white nationalist paradise, there's still this really dark, very very queer aspect to the city of Portland and the history of Portland that really is exploitative. And Gus Van Sant, they really talk about Gus Van Sant in a very interesting way here, where they're not giving him any breaks, or giving him room for an excuse for the role that he played in the lives of the street youth that he used as his subjects, but also in River Phoenix, and what happened to River. Even though there's a lot talked about, River made his own choices. River, had a very unique upbringing in history and personality and social understanding that led him to the drugs and led him to what happened. But it was encouraged by Gus and, that type of society that Gus Van Sant kind of created, exploiting the existing street queer urban youth culture that existed.
Right.
So
also, just going on with what you were saying, it also taps into the very queerness of River Phoenix's particular appeal, irrespective of his sexuality. He did tap into something, I think, because of his looks, I think because of his outsider status that was ingrained because of his truly strange upbringing, prior to his getting involved in film, and it tapped into that particular vibe of that particular actor so well in a way that, in ways that I never contemplated, I have to say. And from this point on, he's somebody that, outside of the Gus Van Sant influence, that I do think that there's there's a River Phoenix wing to gay cinema now, after my interpretation from this. I don't know if you guys felt the same.
No, I didn't. I found myself as I was sitting there reading the book, and even afterwards, and in some of the short discussions that we all have had about it, we really haven't dived into it until now. But I remember like this moment sitting here thinking, there's really no Jared Leto character or figure if there's not a River Phoenix figure. So it really did bring in this kind of idea of not necessarily gender queer or gender fluid, but just this nonconformist young iconography and methodology to acting that I think people like Jared Leto picked up on. Like, I even think about Tilda Swinton, and some of the roles that Tilda plays. that I still think is rooted in something that I don't necessarily think that he did it first. Because I mean, you have cinema and film like Victor Victoria, which go way back.
I mean, way back to Tallulah Bankhead and Marlene Dietrich. I mean, that particular dynamic has been around for a long, long time.
Just really embodied it, and
the 90s-ish of it, I think is something that's really appealing. And also, and this even permeated some very conventional films like Running on Empty. It's there. And, I do think that the mark of great work is certain other works that influence that particular work you never view in the same way again. And I haven't taken the steps of reviewing my own Private Idaho like you, Steve. It's been 25 years maybe, but I do know that when I do press play on that, it's going to be a very different experience from my interpretation of the landscape that this book covered.
Well, yeah, and that movie is 30 years old this year, so this is the 30th year since it's been made, or at least since it was released. And a few years back, James Franco, who's another big adherent to Gus Van Sant's work, took a lot of those outtakes and a lot of the not necessarily behind the scenes, but like the extra footage that wasn't used in the film, and recut it into a new film called My Own Private River. And I watched that, and everything that both of you mentioned about River Phoenix's, the way that he portrayed his character and the way that he embodied his character, it's sexually very queer. River himself, I think, was unapologetically bi, but at the same time, in this, he's fully committed to his queerness in a way that his co-star Keanu is not. And you can tell from the outtakes that weren't used that there was a comfort in the character that River had that goes beyond just, I'm acting, and he was a big method actor, and that plays a part in it as well. But this is almost as if he weren't in Hollywood, if he weren't acting on screen, this is what he would be doing. And in fact, Manny mentions it, that as a kid, he and his sister Rain in Costa Rica would busk. Like, they would bring home money just singing and playing instruments on the streets of Costa Rica, because their parents weren't making any money as part of that Children of God cult. And moving back up to Oregon, where he's from, and it would be easy for him to just go right into that role of being a queer street kid.
Also worth noting, it's also the 30th. Yeah. Also worth noting, it's also the 30th anniversary of the release of Nirvana's Nevermind.
Yeah.
And though it doesn't make a big deal of the comparisons between River and Kurt, there is the alignment of the Pacific Northwest, the alignment of precarious situations in their upbringing. And, if there ever was an album that tapped into a particular time, that tapped into the anxiety that many young people were feeling, it was Nevermind. I was there, I know. And I don't want to say that that's a companion piece to this, but it certainly does allow for a view of that there was something of that particular time period in this period, particularly 88 to 93. It was 93 that he died, correct?
Yeah, 93 October. Halloween.
With Kurt dying in 94, in April 94, it's there as well.
Well, and there's a parallel between the lives of those two individuals too. I mean, you just said it, that they died within a year apart. Both died much too young. They were both in. I mean, obviously there's the substance abuse to raise up, but there's also this kind of abject queerness that I think Kurt Cobain had too. That wasn't necessarily Yeah, that wasn't necessarily. I think it was explored in his music, but it was never explored in the same way that River Phoenix explored his own sexuality, or at least put it on display. But it's even, if we're thinking about the difference between orientation and gender, Kurt Cobain was very, I think if he had lived in a different time, there's a gender fluidness at least to Kurt Cobain.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to make obviously that decision is for everybody individually to make. And I've seen some people say, hey, if there was a transness to him that never came out, maybe at a different time it could have. Not going to make that bridge. That's not for me to make. But those kind of social genetics, or at least building blocks, are there for him. And I really do think that I think you're right to bring up that parallel, because they were a huge impact on those respective individuals' art circles, in both film and in music. That you can't ignore it, because it's just it's blatant.
Yeah. Well, and just the connections between River and the musicians that were in the Pacific Northwest. I like to imagine that he and Nirvana kind of traveled in similar circles in some cases. But there's a lot of connection there with the music and the art scene, the indie scene, the very much that kind of grunge mentality where it's the street that informs the fashion, the music, the sentiment, the understanding of society, that kind of questioning of the norm and what should be normal and what's acceptable. It was punk in a way that kind of looked at punk as like, well, whatever, but like it's more punk. But I think, again, looking at punk, looking at that type of street culture and that kind of that music culture as well, and the drug culture and everything that went along with it, it goes hand in hand with the same skinhead culture that existed. The racist skinhead, not the original skins of late 70s UK, but it's just it's very interesting.
I will always maintain, whether it's Sharps or whether it's the original National Fronters or what we have in the States, or the extension with the Proud Boys, there is such a huge, whether they know it or not, homoerotic element to that subculture. And it's there. And in this book, I would say unabashedly and avowedly queer celebration, in a sense. I don't know if celebration is the correct word, but it's not a, oh God, you see, this is something I have to say, because this particular book affected me so greatly that I completely understand why Steve reread the book and Caleb reread the book. I haven't had the opportunity because I'm the newbie here. And I, that with this particular book, it's so complicated. The link to American intolerance is complicated. The link to racially discriminatory practices and the foundations that set up Portland in the first place are complicated. I don't think things like Portlandia, with this illusion of a liberal and prosperous and in some way mythical landscape of Portland, Oregon, I don't think that's necessarily invalid. But this particular version of an examination of that city is it's far more potent as far as I'm concerned. A word that I always come away with my experience with this book is haunted. I'm haunted by this book, not just the gray watercolors and not just the landscape, but the general feel to how Mannie set this book up. I think it's the best argument ever to continue teaching cursive in schools. And the way that the book tied together what from the outside seems to be so disparate elements of the films of Gus Van Sant. And again, we've been going through my own Private Idaho, but there's tremendous link to Drugstore Cowboy in this, and by extension later works like Elephant and Last Days, the first two of the Three Death trilogy. It ties together the Children of God background. I've seen documentaries on that. I've seen documentaries on the death of Mulugero Sirah, who was the Ethiopian American that was murdered by the skinhead group. The 1988 appearance by the young hate mongers on Geraldo. This seamless tying together of these elements in such a way that I come away with it that this is one of the best graphic novels I have ever read. And this is potentially a very important new voice in the graphic storytelling medium. And, in the time that this podcast has started, there have been a few works that I think are of this level where it's not necessarily something groundbreaking, but it covers terrain in a way that other works haven't. I had thought Duncan the Wonder Dog was something that I could provide, but that actually was 2010. I was very disappointed to not be able to bring that in. But even works that I think are somewhat more commercial in a sense, like Saga and Tom King and Mitch Gerard's Mr. Miracle, they do something different.
Yep.
And this is certainly one of these cases. And if it's a case that you're watching this show and you're a Marvel zombie, or you like very conventional storytelling, challenge yourself with this book because it's worth it. Plain and simple, it's worth it.
And if you're under the age of 20, learn cursive so you can read it. The Mulugero Sirah story and Ken Death, who are other, Ken Death is another prominent figure in this book. They're all part of this world. They're all part of the River Phoenix world. They're part of the, the history of Portland. They're like, everything builds on what came before. And because this is a stream of consciousness, Mannie jumps around a lot, but it's all tied together so well that it's almost as if somebody is telling you the story. Somebody is just sitting you down and saying, hey, I've got this tale I need to tell you. I got the story of Portland I need to tell you. And just going around where everything is connected. You don't feel like the stream of consciousness is distracting you from understanding what Mannie's trying to say. And successfully says.
I'm going to use one of those buzzwords that I know a lot of people hate, but there's an intersectionality to all these things, right? So you have, if we break down what this book is doing, if we break down things into kind of pillars and columns, you've got queer issues, you've got queer theory, you've got race relations, you've got crime and drug culture, and then you've got popular culture and the disposition of media, and we think about those things sometimes, and I think what Mannie was doing in this book, or at least what I've interpreted Mannie to be doing in this book, is it's almost like a wake-up call. Like there's this moment like, oh shit, we got problems. And we've got problems on these 4 or 5, 6, 7 different fronts. I mean, it depends on what lens you're reading the book through, whether what you're going to discuss. But you've got all of these things, like I just mentioned, but they're not separate. And I think a lot of times, even now in modern popular culture, we try to address each of these quote unquote issues separately. We try to address drug culture and poverty in and of itself, and racism in and of itself. What this book does really well, I think, from the start of the 90s, from that kind of jumping off point, is shows how these things they're rooted together. So I love the evolution and the advancement of River Phoenix and dealing, and gay cinema and kind of this counterculture-esque lifestyle, while simultaneously jumping back and forth and talking about the rise of Ken Death and the I don't know what to call it, the radicalization of Ken Death by Tom Metzger,
Yeah.
And the only other thing, as far as a media standpoint, that I've seen come not even close, but I would say anywhere close. It reminded me a lot of American History X. That they discuss some of those same themes in there. And American History X didn't do nearly as good of a job as this novel did in looping them together and tying them together and show how they actually, all of these issues, all of these things, it all stemmed from the same proverbial bulb that this book does. And it wraps it up in the end of the book. I mean, you go from talking about wagon trains to talking about the Bundy family and their stage, their in the 2015, 2016, all of that. It shows a pathway and how ignoring or pretending these things don't exist, pretending queer culture doesn't exist, pretending racism doesn't exist, perpetuates into all of these other, I don't want to call them problems, because again, we're talking about queer theory too, and I refuse to bracket that into a problem, but all of these other themes, right? Like the onset of racism and how shifty things are. I mean, you've got Geraldo Rivera on a platform pushing back against white nationalism and white racism. You cut to 2021, I would argue that Geraldo Rivera does a wonderful job of giving those people a platform and running the smoke screen for them. And how it's how it's all a shift, it's a grift, so to speak, because that wasn't rooted out in the first place, because they ignored what was happening then with those aspects, and to be able to weave that in and out of this disjointed narrative, just chef's kiss.
We probably should start moving on to other books, but I do think we probably have like another 3 hours we could talk about this. But again, we did want to spotlight this for a decent amount of time. Again, this is I Never Promised You a Rose Garden by Mannie Murphy from Fantagraphics. It's part history lesson, it's part love letter, it's part memoir, it's part indictment, and it's none of those things at the same time.
Yeah.
And you should read it, and we told you so.
Yes. Read it more than once. Read it a couple times.
All right. Well, the purpose of this particular episode, we were going to talk about original graphic novels. We had the one that we all wanted to talk about. So we're going to be talking about other ones that we recently read. I'll start, as I always do, with Steve, who is over here for me. And Steve, why don't you tell us about a book that you recently read that satisfies the original graphic novel requirement that you either enjoyed or experienced? When I get to mine, I don't know if I can say enjoyed. Okay.
I agree with your use of that word there for your book.
Yeah.
So the book that I'm reading, and this is one that I just, again, on a frickin' whim, saw it and was like, maybe I should pick that up. And it is the book by Eleanor Cruz, as the cartoonist, The Times I Knew I Was Gay. And fits perfectly well with the theme of June, which for me, I've challenged myself to read even more queer and queer compatible graphic novels this month. And so over the next couple of weeks, I'll be at least, one of my books every week will be one of these. And this one was really fun. It's very interesting. It's I think maybe geared more for a teenage, young adult audience. The subject here, Eleanor Cruz, this is an autobiographical book. Eleanor writes about her life growing up, when she discovered she was queer, and how she already knew that she had been queer the entire time. And of course, all the mistakes that she makes, just like every other queer person, gay person coming out, understanding who they are, trying to navigate what that means in the world, especially when they've had this established personality, this established, person that they've been presenting to the rest of the world. How do they reconcile that with the knowledge that they are gay? And she does a really great job. It's very emotional. The cartooning is fun. There's a lot of a lot of humor in it. Really great expressions with the character of herself. And of course, she goes through a lot of interesting mistakes, like through college, where she, has been saving herself this whole time. So it was an easy cover for her being a lesbian. saving herself. I don't want to sleep with any boys. But then she ends up, she comes out to her friends and ends up sleeping with a couple boys. Like, it's just, there's a lot of things where she doesn't accept herself. She does accept herself. She doesn't accept herself. She goes back into the closet a little bit. And I think does a really good job of showing that not every coming out story is the same, but also not every young queer experience is going to be the same. You'll have people who come out much later in life, whether they knew 100% that they were gay or queer, or maybe the ones that always knew that they were, but just didn't have the right time to come out and be, and be who they really were, or how they could present themselves. But I really like this. It's done very sweetly. It's done in a great, reader-friendly way, explaining her life. And I love autobiography, so, this is great for me. But I would recommend this for, if you have teenagers in your life or young people in your life that you want to give a fun, quick read. And it's only about 300 pages, but they're, it's graphic novel pages, so not too tough to bang it out in a couple hours. I'd recommend it. It's fun. And for somebody who's like a 20-year queer like me, I was still able to really see myself in a lot of her internal monologues and her conversations with herself that she presented on the page. So, The Times I Knew I Was Gay by Eleanor Cruz.
And who is the publisher on that?
Scribner. It's a Simon & Schuster imprint, so Scribner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Caleb, let's hear about a book that you read.
All right. Well, before that, I just want to say, I think Steve's book, that's, especially talking about this month, one thing I think that gets lost in how lucky we are to live in kind of the zeitgeist that we live in is for a lot of people, it's relatively easier to come out. And so a lot of people feel like they have to come out, or people who are, closeted, they feel extra shame in the fact that they're closeted. You got to come out on your own terms. Like, you can't, do it when you're ready. Like, you shouldn't ever feel pressure.
You're on your own timetable.
Exactly.
I think about my experience, and I worked in New York theater professionally. I was involved in theater on a non-professional basis before and after that. I had access, and I didn't have the tools to accept it yet. Mm-hmm. It was a situation where there would have been no problem. Not everybody has that. I completely understand that the social situation that you're in, familial situation that you're in, may not be conducive to coming out at a particularly young age. I completely get it. I didn't have that, and I still wasn't ready. Right. So I think it's very important to say that, Caleb, that there is no timetable that one person adopts that another person can adopt just on the basis of them being slightly similar. We do it in our own time. We're ready for it in our own time, and this also goes. At this point, I still have friendships with men who are not out publicly. Who are older than myself, and they have their various reasons, and I was never on board with outing, except in the circumstances where it was somebody like a politician that was actively involved in campaigns that were to the detriment of the gay community. Right. I do think that that's a situation where outing is acceptable, because the hypocrisy and the damage that does, I think, absolutely overweights the personal interest of that particular individual. They're a shitty person, and
I'm not going to issue a kindness to you if you're going to destroy me with it.
Yeah.
I think,
but in other circumstances, I've never been for it, because there's because on our society, it's still complicated. We talked about a lot about complications today. This is the complicated show.
The dances, the complicated.
But I'm glad, especially because we're effectively from different generations. You and Steve are a bit more closer in age, but there's still an age gap there too.
Mhm.
And I especially enjoy. I don't want to say enjoy hearing, but I like hearing like-minded opinions from people who are not my own age.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Oh, I mean, it's just you told your coming out story. I'll throw mine in there before I talk about the book. But it's I was 20 when I came out and tried to live out for a very short time and got so much blowback that I literally dropped out of college the first time and fled the state and went semi back in the closet for several years and genuinely lived a double life until 2011. And then I met Roger, the person, I had relationships, but it was very much like you come over, no one sees you. I have groups of friends where, I'm going to walk in the back door, not, insert backdoor joke here, but that's neither here nor there. But, and lived that double life until 2011, when I met Roger. And that's when I decided to really just go ahead and stop and revamp. So even my generation, like I'm a millennial, like, it's still very, there are so many personal reasons to do what you have to do. So and that's not to discourage anybody from coming out. Like come out wherever you are, but you do it on your timetable. Like it's a beautiful life to live when you're ready. So okay, but comics, right?
So, it's complicated. Okay.
I tell you that story. I tell you that story to tell you this story about a comic where the main character, his name is Caleb. He's gay. He is dealing with his alcoholism and has daddy issues and loves comics. All that being said, not about me. Not a story about me. The book is called Fictional Father, and it's by a writer named Joe Ullman. And if you didn't look at the author's name, you would think this book was autobiographical because it's told that way. It's basically a memoir, but it's a fictional memoir, a really, really good fictional memoir. So essentially, your main character in this book is kind of a schlub. Caleb is kind of a schlub. He's kind of a nobody. He's a wannabe artist. He's in a relationship that's on again, long-term relationship there's not a lot happening with that. There's some issues. But he exists with a lot of, padding because his father is this renowned, beloved, much syndicated cartoonist who has done this long-term strip about a father and a son. And to the point that that his father is essentially known as America's dad, right? So he's told this story about his father and son and all of these wonderful fatherly moments where people all around the world get these, amazing feel goods, but also they get this advice and this inspiration to be better people. And that's great, except it's all bullshit. His father lived most of his life down in his his basement, but in his studio working on the strip. He was he cheated on his wife constantly. He was the book refers to him as a poon hound. He never met a skirt he didn't want to chase. He loved the limelight more than his own child, and he very much let the child know that. So these things built up a lot of resentment, a lot of issues for the main character in this book, for Caleb, and he struggles with it all through his life. And so now he reaches this point where he's in his mid-40s. People come up to him, oh, what was it like to have, America's dad as your own dad? It must have been wonderful. And he just kind of chokes it down because at the end of the day, he's still getting a paycheck from his dad. Like he lives in a house or studio that's technically his dad's museum. And so he's on the payroll and everything is just essentially, he's this trust fund kid who's getting to live this out, trust fund man. Things start to change though, when his father, who is elderly at this point, very, very elderly at this point, starts slipping. The last 2 years of his life, dementia sets in. They try to keep it quiet. Turns out he's had a couple of ghost writers and ghost artists working on the strip the whole time. Now Caleb has to get it quiet. But when his dad was still in his wits, his dad wrote a will. And in this will, his dad said, hey, if Caleb wants to take over this comic strip, he should be given first choice, which is a very complicated thing. It's almost bequeathing the favorite child to the real child. And so Caleb has to think long and hard about it. But again, Caleb's an artist, so he does all this, and he decides he wants to figure that out. While all of this is going on, it's Q Bill. It's even more complicated in the fact that Caleb he's dealing with his sobriety. He's been at this point, I think, 20 years sober. He was an alcoholic, used a lot of pills, had a lot of these River Phoenix moments, but finally got clean to the point that he's lived sober for several years. He volunteers with basically a local AA group, and so he's taking on people, being a mentor. He gets a young man who is, he's an alcoholic. He's freshly clean, trying to get clean, who is also gay, who, tries to, he gets infatuated with Caleb, with his mentor, tries to sleep with him, does not sleep with him, but does get caught kissing him, which causes an issue in Caleb's marriage. So all of these things kind of combust at the same time for Caleb, and he has to figure out where he's going to go with his own life. At the end of the day, it's really a struggle with this person trying to figure out their own personhood and step out of the shadow of their father's legacy, which I found incredibly interesting. The book is funny. It's it's loaded with humor, but it also gets deep and heavy at times. It deals with a number of things. And the cool thing is it's told in this very, I think this is a good indication of what the book looks like. Beautiful colors, primary colors. Oftentimes it breaks into the comic strip, yellowed pages. It's this interesting. I'm trying to think of who I would compare it to. If you've read books like March, you might recognize some of the style. It's kind of that same style, but the book goes into some of the comic history of strips too. So you get, apparently I didn't know this, the actual father-son team of Dennis the Menace, like the child who is Dennis hated his dad, like some of these same situations. The book goes into talking about people like the XYZ comics and these outlaw comics and Peter, now that I want to say his name, I can't think of his name, who did
Baggy?
Peter Baggy, and how Peter Baggy was actually a big influence in this book, and stylistically as well. But there's a ton of fun. It is a queer story, so it does fit into this theme. It's fiction, but it's a fictional biography. I think there's a lot of Joe Ullman in this book, if not even in small layers. So, and it spoke to me on a couple of levels, not least of which was shocking the shit out of me how very much it paralleled my life sometimes. So go check it out. It's fun. Well, Fictional Father.
Okay, and the publisher on that is Drawn and Quarterly.
D&Q, yep.
Yeah, and I can say that I have never been disappointed by anything I've read from Drawn and Quarterly, and they cover a wide breadth from, like very strange manhwa to reprints of Gasoline Alley from the 1920s.
Craig Thompson.
Yeah, if only for the introduction of Gasoline Alley to me, it warrants their continued existence as a publisher. And it's one of the few publishers that I always have a rewarding experience when I read a book published from them. And
Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly are very much in sync for me in that point. They always take even if it's not a book that I'm going to like fall in love with, it's an interesting perspective. And I will take a book that may not be perfect, but makes me think over a book that's just polished and rubbed to hell. But you get nowhere. There's no traction to be had there. So.
All right, I'm about to harsh the bliss a little bit. So before we do that, let's have one more moment of levity, and we can talk about what we're wearing. So, Steve, I noticed that shirt. It's familiar because I have one too. So why don't you tell us about it?
Well, I think you might recognize this from friends of the show, the Spoiler Country podcast group. This one in particular, Open the Mind and Read More, is the lovely Cthulhu, who is, of course, very very much sporting the Pride colors this year. So open the mind and read more. Spoiler country, fellow podcast.
Okay. And over to Sleeveless Caleb. What do you have there?
All right, so I got two things. The first is the T-shirt, and it's my Love is Love Batman Superman shipping T-shirt, just because it was fun. I think that book or the shirt actually came out when the Love is Love anthology came out. But the second thing, the thing I kind of want to showcase is I was lucky to be my kind of law school LGBTQ alliance president this past year, and we did a fundraiser and we did hats, which has our cool little bow and Little Rock logo on it. But we also put the flag on the back of it and sold these.
Yeah.
So super proud of the organization. I didn't come up with it. It was totally the organization that came up with it that made it happen, and turned out awesome. So I get to rock this everywhere I go. So
awesome.
Okay, it's a sign that we're coming out of the pandemic that I'm buying something that isn't a T-shirt. So I think we're good there. And what I have is, a little short sleeve knit shirt that, if you notice here, is a bunch of little, whether you call him the child or Baby Yoda or Grogu, little depictions of this fella. And
it's so
that's
cute.
what I have. Yep.
Or as I call him, Grogery.
Not getting Grogery. Okay. All right. Here I go. I read a book. I have a stack of the DC books that are meant for young readers. Some are meant for very young readers, the 8 to 12, and then others are for the more bordering on the young adult. This is something that was more along the lines of a graphic novel for kids. And as you see here, it is Lois Lane and the Friendship Challenge, which yeah. This is the only time, it's not even his face, it's his arm that has made a kid.
It's a cameo.
We've made history.
I do live with somebody, and he brought my little Grogu bath towel that is never going to be used as a bath toy because it's so damn cute.
It's too cute.
Okay, there we go. All right, so okay, you made history. Okay, so for the book that I chose, it's Lois Lane and the Friendship Challenge, that is written by Grace Ellis, who's the co-creator of Lumberjanes, and it is illustrated by Brittany Williams. I think Brittany's biggest work that she did was Goldie Vance. Steve, was that a book you read, or am I confusing it with Zodiac Star Force? Or
I did not read Goldie Vance,
okay,
unfortunately, so I'm not too familiar with it.
But I hope you understand why I confused it, because it is a very similar art style, married to the more kid-oriented manga. With this particular book, it was very difficult for some reason to find out who did the colors and who did the lettering for this book. So I do want to shout them out, because from an artistic standpoint, this book is an absolute triumph. The coloring is by Caitlin Quirk and the lettering by Ariana Marr. And just give you some little bits here. From an artistic standpoint, I have no complaints. From a writer's standpoint, oh boy. Okay. So a little bit of background about why I really detested this book. Lois Lane, to me, is, after Wonder Woman, the most important female character that they have. In almost every incarnation, she is a heroine for little girls to look up to. She is strong. She is independent. She is successful in her field, and she is someone who never, ever gives up. And very often when she is involved in a story, it's because she is exposing things for the greater good. To me, she's as much a heroine as many of the other superpowered characters in the DC universe. We don't get that here. The Lois Lane in this story, though she is 13 years old, is mean, obnoxious, rude. She's a bully. She's a terrible friend. She hurts people around her without thought. She's abrasive. She comes across as very immature. She is petty. She is jealous. She is vindictive. This is not the Lois Lane that anybody knows or loves, but is a child that could easily warrant a psychiatric intervention. And while I understand that the elements of this selfish characterization of Lois uh, could be used as a foil for a later aha moment in the book of self realization, she never shows much growth as a character, and she never does anything that she's known for within this book. Now, where we are in this book, it takes place in the fictional suburban town of Liberty View, which you have to assume is a suburb of Metropolis. We never get a lot of background information. And the story, as it is, centers around a bike race, an online friendship challenge, and stolen fireworks. You guys still with me? Okay. So that's where we're at. Lois has a best friend, Christian, and the two girls learn that the town's fireworks for the jamboree that takes place after the bike race have gone missing, and they decide to solve the case. At this point, Lois is not a aspiring reporter, but an aspiring detective. And at the same time, there's a mysterious new girl who arrives in town named Izzy. This new girl enjoys riding her bike, and she seems pretty fast, which makes Lois think that she is a ringer for the race, where previously Christian was identified in that sort of bracket. And naturally, she thinks she is behind the stealing of the fireworks. Throughout this process, I'm doing so much justice to this book because it is so convoluted and just so boring that I'm actually making it sound more interesting than it is. So, yay me. The friendship gets tested. The mystery is extremely shallow, and the book mostly revolves around that unresolved friend drama. In a lot of ways, it's kind of a textbook about how to push away a best friend. One thing I will say, though, is the way that Lois interacts with social media is realistic. So I will give um, Grace Ellis a little bit of credit on that, but she also pushes the twist of Lois not want to be a journalist so much that it's faulty, and there really isn't a hell of a lot of daylight between sleuthing and investigative reporting as far as I'm concerned. So that's faulty as it is. The dialogue is remarkably forced, and for me it fails what I call the Dawson's Creek test. um, no kids sound the way that these kids sound in here. They just don't. But what I call the Dawson's Creek test is on Dawson's Creek, if you accept when you watch that show that this isn't the way that teenagers sound, but it's the way teenagers think they sound, you can start enjoying it. It fails even that test. And there's so much that you could use with Lois, what we have with her background. She's a military kid. She's a military brat. Why wasn't that used? That's a wonderful backdrop, especially for friendships, especially for the notion of kids that are almost always on the move and how tenuous some of their relationships with other kids their age can be. And I felt with this story that this wasn't Lois. This is the author only knowing her from the most base stereotype. And in the end, we get a really regressive version of what Lois Lane is. It's very hard to see how this person would grow up to be Lois Lane. So I didn't like it. Steve, I know you read it. I was interested to hear about some of your takes there.
So yeah, I read it when it first came out. I picked it up because I've been picking up, of course, all of the the younger reader directed DC books from the DC Inc. and well, I guess it's just all DC now. And man, I didn't know what to. I didn't know what was going on.
You're confused and you're bored, and
you're confused and bored, and that pissed me off because visually this is a great book. It's vibrant. It's something that I know kids are gonna love to read. looking at it. So this would be something that I was excited. I was like, hey, this is something I can recommend to younger readers. This might be something that they might enjoy. I think if a younger reader were to read this, not only would they be confused, there's nothing in here to signal Lois Lane or what Lois Lane is. So it's not even like younger version of Lois Lane does stuff. It's like, who is this brat? Who is this?
Look at this portion. And again, thankfully, there's almost no dialogue here. Look how wonderful that is.
Yeah.
Look at that.
But there's just nothing, and like the mystery doesn't make sense. The vicious attack, like verbal attacks and suspicions that Lois throws at Izzy the entire book, and you're like, where is this coming from? Like, there's just nothing that makes sense. It's like, the leap of logic doesn't even make sense for children. Like, it just seems like what's going on. The mystery is dumb. The resolution is forced and silly, and
it also felt like it also was set in a small town, and it felt like it was written by someone who's never set foot in a small town.
Yes,
and to me, that's a very small town big problem, because there's a certain dynamic to dialogue when it is an urban setting or when it is whether it's suburban or something more rural. It adds to the story. It should, and it's just not there.
Nope.
Yeah. It's disappointing to learn coming from a writer who gave us Lumberjanes. Yeah. Right? Is that, you said that was a project that she wrote before?
Yeah. No, I haven't read a lot of Lumberjanes. I've read the first issue, and I read all of the crossover with Gotham Academy, which I really enjoyed. And I was not expecting the book to go so far south in not hitting the marks on friendship and some other elements.
Yeah. I mean, I could say it'd be forgivable that this Lois, only shares a name, not any other personality traits, if the story itself made sense, if it was, like
there were so many things that didn't make sense, like the college friend Henrietta. Why on earth does she have any kind of interaction with this version of Lois? There's nothing there that makes sense. Yeah,
there's a lot there.
Even with her being a journalist on school, you never get that moment of Lois falling in love with journalism, which was what I was hoping for and expecting. God forbid there's a sequel.
This book subverts our expectations. Greatly.
It was
because we expected it to be good. No, I was disappointed in that there were a lot of opportunities in this book. That even if it didn't have the DC badge, if Lois Lane was not the name of the main character, if this was any other character, if it was like, Janie Smith, I still don't think that the book was told in a way, or at least the story was told in a way, or the characters were drawn in a way, drawn very well. Characters were developed in a way that I think a young reader would even enjoy. Or even pick up again. When I was a kid and I was reading books, those YA books, I would pick them up and I would read them over and over and over again. Yeah, I had my, the older reader books, the Stephen Kings and all that stuff, which I read too. But the YA books that I loved, I read over and over again. I don't think I'll ever pick this thing up again. Other than to show that I also have a copy when Bill was talking about it.
And I also have to say, though, this has been a line of books that have by and large been pretty good. I know I'm not the target audience, but I've enjoyed almost every one of them to one degree or another. Even a book like Primer, which I didn't really lock onto, and there's actually a preview in here of Primer. I understood the appeal of it. There was enough heart that went into the book that even if it didn't charm me, I understood how it could be charming to somebody else. And some of the other middle grade books, the Black Canary book is fantastic. The one of a young Barbara Gordon before she becomes Batgirl is wonderful. There are great books in this series. This just it was disturbing how 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 much this didn't fit in with the rest of those.
Yeah.
And, like I said, Lois Lane is an amazing character. There's so many elements that they could have mined that really haven't been mined before, especially, hitting a character in the age that they did here. Again, I mentioned the military bradism. Her very strained relationship with her father, the relationship with her sister, which is not always portrayed as something as rosy. They just blew it. One thing I did do with this book, because I hated it so much, is I looked at other reviews. This is something I never usually do, but I just wanted to know what other people were thinking, and specifically, educators. And I was kind of pleased to see that, it got slammed in various areas. But one thing that came up is there's a series of prose novels of a 16-year-old Lois Lane written by Gwenda Bond, and those were very often compared to this, and just about how that hit the trappings and hit the marks in the way that this book never did. And I'm so interested in reading those prose novels now. I know next to nothing about them, but apparently there was a series of 3 books of a 16-year-old Lois Lane that I'm going to investigate, because I got to get the bad taste of this out of my mouth. Yeah, it was, I honestly think, just because I was just because it was such an ordeal to get through this, I honestly think that I would rank Batman Fortnite higher, and y'all know how much I love that book. So,
what's the sound effect?
La Bamba.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I did want to. I did want to give a shout out.
Nothing.
Okay. I did want to give a shout out to the people who've joined us tonight. We've had some comments from John Westhoff. We've had Lima Nato and our friend David Toby as well have come in and said hello to us. Where is the La Bamba? Yeah,
I gave it to you, baby. Also, I've seen we also have Anthony Comito watching. Thank you, Anthony, for tuning in. So we always appreciate people that are on the live element of this.
And I shared this.
Well behaved, yeah.
I shared this on my personal Facebook page, and the first person to heart it was Brother Brian, as Bill likes to say. So he's with us in spirit. So,
how does Brian do the heart thing? What does he do? Over the heart? Does he do it over the heart? Oh,
one for each. There we go.
All right. Well,
think of them as the pasties of love.
According to the clock that I have on my computer there, it's time that we start wrapping the show up. And when we wrap an element, Jesus Christ. When we wrap an episode of the Comic Book Bears podcast up, we do so with a segment we call the Woofs of the Week segment. In the bear community, if you find a fellow attractive, you woof at him, and we do something similar here. This is where we signify something which may be a comic book, but it may also be a film or a TV program or a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener or viewer, may be interested in sampling. I'll start, as I always do, with Steve. Steve, what is your woof of the week?
My woof of the week is a returning show on, used to be called CBS All Access or whatever, and now it's called Paramount Plus. So it's CBS's streaming service, Paramount Plus, and that show is Why Women Kill Season 2. The first season was really interesting in that it took 3 separate stories from 3 different eras in the history of a particular house. In the 50s, the 80s, and the 2020 or 20 teens, and all following women who, by the end of the season are going to commit murder. And you wonder how they get there. And basically the show shows you how they get to that point. Amazing cast, really funny in between, of course, the fact that it's all going to end in death. Did a really good job. This season, they're taking a different tack to it. And Mark Cherry decided to make it all one era, 1949. So, of course, if you love vintage, if you love that sort of post-war, pre-50s style of clothing, cars, everything, this has got it all for you. And following the story of multiple women in and around LA, the Hollywood area. And it's very surprising. Cast is amazing. You've got Nick Frost in it, who, of course, I love, and I'm sure a lot of Bears watching and listening love too. But also you've got several other people. Lana Parrilla.
I love her.
Once Upon a Time.
Played
the Evil Queen.
She was on a show that so deserved a bigger chance called Swingtown, about swingers in the 1970s. Caleb's nodding like he did see that show. Just a fantastic cast, and she was the highlight of that particular show.
Well,
I love her.
Seasons? You get 2 seasons or one season?
13 episodes. It was 13 and out.
An interesting there. I would say that the first and second season, the cast does have some interesting connections. In the first season, Jennifer Goodwin played the 1950s housewife, who, of course, you may remember as playing Snow White in Once Upon a Time, in which Lana Parrilla, of course, was the evil queen. Also, you have Matthew Daddario, who is the younger brother of Alexandra Daddario, who was the sort of seductress in one of the stories in the first seasons, Why Women Kill. But I do have to say, out of everybody in the cast, Alison Tolman, who plays pretty much the main character, is fantastic. She's wonderful to watch. And this show does give you feelings of Fargo, in which, she was one of the main casts, I think, in season 2 of Fargo as well. She does an amazing job. There's some magical realism. There's some cool music. There's really wacky narration by Jack Davenport, who was a victim in the first movie. Great. Check it out. It's on, I believe, Thursdays on Paramount Plus if you have that streaming service. So check it out.
Okay.
But don't watch it while you should be watching Comic Book Bears on Thursdays.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, they release it first thing in the morning. You can start watching.
I'm just happy if they're eventually watching or listening to it. There's lots of things on Thursdays. We have this 1-2 punch right now of Dark Side of the Ring and Dark Side of Football. I get it. I get if you're not there. You should be here. But if you're not there, I get it. But come here at some point.
Oh, and
where
Bill,
else are you going to get money now? Blue Eyes.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
They're
and
blue again this week. Yeah.
And of course, that's sure, because John Runyon did just mention, as John's popped on, Bill, that sure rocks my world.
John, do you think I would have been okay at the Hellfire Gala dressed as I was at the beginning of the episode?
Maybe?
All right.
John did reply, yes, fierce.
Fierce, baby. All right. Let's go over to Caleb. Caleb, what is your wolf of the week?
All right. My wolf of the week comes out to something I don't have yet, but I want. And I want it, ergo I have to promote it because it's a Kickstarter. And it's really cool because it's a Kickstarter that it's kind of a meeting of two worlds. The book that I want you all to go back on Kickstarter is called Mechaton. And there's several reasons I want you to go back it because number one, it looks great, cool art. It's about giant robots and kaiju and friendship and all these other things. But the book was written by two friends of mine that from here in Arkansas. I met them at my local comic book shop, Dalton Shannon and Wells Thompson. Amazing people. They write together. They're really good friends. They've since gone off to do other things or in other parts of the world. But I still love them dearly. The book that's my side of this thing of the worlds colliding. The person I met through Comic Book Bears, who is a dear friend, made a trip, does the colors on this book. So boom, it comes together and it's awesome. I love Mayday's colors. Why would you not want this? Mayday drawing giant robots or coloring giant robots. And it's drawn by Mr. Fernando Pinto, who is I want to say Brazilian artist. And like I said, you check out the book on Kickstarter. Right now, it's not fully back yet. There's 15 days to go. They're close to halfway. So they're about 2,400 right now. They need to get 6,000. They've got 77 backers. Go back this book. So the story in the nutshell, Siblings Derek and Leah don't really have a plan. All they know is video games. And till this giant glove falls out of the sky. And this giant glove is kind of like a mecha version of the Midas touch. So put it on, they touch things like a hot dog cart in the middle of New York turns into a giant hot dog mech that has a mustard and a ketchup gun. It's just pure dumb fun. Comics distilled down to its most energetic and fun nature. So I want it not only for my friends because they have done this cool thing, but also because it genuinely looks great. Like I can't wait to see what they do. So head over to Kickstarter. Just with your keyboard fingers and back it. Look, if you back it at a high enough price, you get Wells Thompson's much coveted family lentil soup recipe, which I backed it at that price. I'm about to tear that up. So there's lots of cool stuff you can get. They have they Condiment King mech, exactly. Yeah. They've got lots of stuff planned for it. So support indie comics if you can, and support friends and friends of the show.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Before I get to my Wolf of the Week, there's two things I want to talk about. There's just two things I want to push. We are slowly getting back to comic book conventions. And this weekend and let me just get this right because I've gotten it wrong, even though I live in the same damn state, at the Mills at Jersey Gardens Mall in Elizabeth, New Jersey. This is the mall that you can see from the Turnpike. There is going to be a comic book fest this upcoming weekend. It starts tomorrow, June 4th, and it runs through the 6th. And it's by my friends at at Garden State Comic Fest. If that's a familiar name for longtime listeners, it's because I previously ran the trivia contest there and contributed to some of the programming there. The way the fest is set up, it's primarily a guest appearance and vendor and artist show right now. It's in a mall. But it looks like a very interesting setup if you go to the website. There will be some familiar names, including Dan Parent and Billy Tucci as guests. They have a reunion of some of the key cast members of the Warriors film from 1979, so that you get some people there. And the guys that run it, Dave and Sal, are great people. And if you want to see me, I will be there on Saturday. So again, it's I'm sorry, I keep saying comic first. It's GardenStateComicFest.com for the particular information about the show, which is running this upcoming weekend, June 4th through the 6th. And something that I don't think you guys know about that I just wanted to briefly touch on. We all love Humble Bundles. And there is a really great Humble Bundle happening right now, which supports some great causes. It's the comics bundle for the Mighty Morph and Power Rangers by Boom Studios. And you can pay whatever you can pay what you want, or but there are levels from $1 to $25. The $25 level is truly stunning. $640 worth of comic books and graphic novels, basically everything that Boom has published in the Mighty Morph and Power Rangers world. So you can check that out at humblebundle.com. And the purchases in these case, all the proceeds go to stop AAPI Hate and the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. So I did want to briefly mention that. I'm going to move on to my Wolf of the Week. And my Wolf of the Week goes to a 2019 film, which is making a bit of a resurgence right now. And this is the film Killing Patient Zero. It's based on the book Patient Zero and the Making of the AIDS Epidemic by Richard McKay, and it's directed by Lori Lynn. And the Patient Zero at the heart of this is a gentleman named Gaten Dugas, who was a flight attendant out of Canada. And the film really sets out and achieves this wonderfully in correcting history to inform viewers that Dugas was not the catalyst for the deadly contagion, but rather, like far too many people that we lost to AIDS, a victim of it. The Patient Zero is even a misnomer because the Patient Zero designation was faulty because it was actually Patient O. and it was because he provided truly invaluable help to researchers in trying to study and understand the AIDS virus. The film takes time to explain the cultural landscape in which the AIDS crisis hit, which for people who are younger than us may not have familiarity with, and with that, the counterbalance to the gay liberation movement. Even though those are elements, it also shifts the focus to beautifully to Degas himself. There are some truly interesting interviews that take place in the film. There's one by a former AIDS task force member, William Darrow, which is beyond poignant. And the film does a very, very good job in balancing personal portrait with a bigger story. And you know, again, with this, it's a redemption for an individual who never should have been vilified. If you want to see it, it's for Pride Month. It's available on Tubi for free with commercials. If you want to avoid those pesky commercials, it's available on a number of sites, including DirecTV and Sundance TV, and it's currently airing on terrestrial TV, not terrestrial TV, but on cable TV on Vice, and it's available on Vice on demand. There's a number of ways to access this film, and it's definitely a worthwhile watch. And again, it's called Killing Patient Zero. And that's my Woof of the week.
Cool. Hey, just some comments here. David had actually also seen the film and says it truly hits hard. So there's another support for that recommendation. And then, of course, you were also giving David some some con FOMO because he's in Australia. He still cannot leave the country yet. Because of their restrictions and controls. We also have James Figueiredo joining us from Brazil. Serve it, Bill. When you were sporting your look like you are now, rocking your Pride best.
I was June not 3rd. Born this way. Okay. But it's cool.
And John Runyon also gives you a Woof of the week for those blue eyes. Yeah. So I
explained this last week, and I don't know if you know this about me, Caleb. I'm one of those people whose eye color changes, and very often it's like this greenish hazel, but sometimes it's blue. And for some reason, over the last few weeks, it's like a really distinctive blue, and I'm digging it.
Make it work for you, boo.
Blue eyes. I'm just singing a little Elton John for Pride. I hope that's okay.
See, I went to the Sopranos
song, so yeah.
I went through the Sopranos theme song, Blue Moon in Your Eyes, so totally different place.
Okay, we're going to wrap this one up. Again, we are the Comic Book Bears podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. If you want to listen to us, you can do so by downloading us through iTunes, listening to us through Stitcher Radio, or catching us on various other podcasting platforms. If you're viewing us, if it's through Facebook Live, we really appreciate you joining. If you're watching through YouTube, please subscribe to our channel and please leave a review. We very much appreciate that. And if you want to write to us, please do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Billy Z.
I'm Steve Morey.
And I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
You're going to hear a woof and an explosion if you're listening to the show. We'll be back real soon. And everybody have a very, very happy Pride Month. Take care.
Happy
everyone.
Pride.